Good evening. Hope everyone is well. Thank you for joining our halachas of Lashon Hara group. We're continuing in Sefer Chafetz Chaim. We're up to Klal Ches Sif Hey, chapter 8, paragraph 5. Okay, so the Chafetz Chaim wrote previously about who it's usher to speak Lashon Hara about. Basically, it's usher to speak Lashon Hara about everybody: man, woman, child. If it's going to harm the child. Like, for instance, if he's in somebody's living in someone's house, or they took him in as an orphan or something, or a foster child, something like that, and it's going to cause people to throw him out, the person has to be very careful, or any other kind of harm that might befall the child by speaking Lashon Hara. So the Chafetz Chaim writes in this sif that this applies only to people who are b'chlal hamisecha. Now, this is a very hot button issue. That these halachas of saying Lashon Hara only applies to people who are b'chlal hamisecha, considered part of your nation. Now, technically, there could be a situation where a person is Jewish, but is not considered halachically part of the Jewish nation. For instance, if someone is an Apikoras, somebody denies Torah Shebal Peh, somebody denies Torah Shebeksav, somebody denies the written Torah, Chumash, somebody denies the oral Torah, somebody denies the Mishnah, the Gemara. In fact, the Chafetz Chaim goes so far as to say that this even applies to someone who believes in every single word of the oral Torah, every single halacha, every single of the 613 mitzvahs. But he says, one kal v'chomer, one limud that is learned out in the Gemara, that the Gemara comes out. I don't hold that that's true. I think that's false. That would put him in the category of being an Apikoras, someone who's a heretic, and he is not considered a Klal Misecha, and one would be allowed to say, well, I say this with great trepidation because you have to listen to the next part. One would technically be allowed to say Lashon Hara about such a person. Now, it's a very hot button issue of who is considered an Apikoras in this situation. Meaning, there are a lot of secular Jews, unfortunately, who are totally cut off for generations from Torah. One of my Rebbeim once said to me that he never met an Apikoras. He never met a real Apikoras because nobody really knows enough to be an Apikoras. Nobody really, delved into the Torah and formulated a real opinion anti-Torah. When we call somebody Apikoras these days, a heretic, it just means that he doesn't know anything, he doesn't follow anything. He's not really anti. He doesn't know enough to be anti. He doesn't know anything. He's not like the old time Apikorasim from maybe a few hundred years ago who went to yeshiva, went to cheder, saw great people, and decided to willfully rebel against Hashem, against Torah, against Torah Moshe, against Torah Shebal Peh, Torah Shebeksav, against any nevuah. Any of those things, denying any of those things would render a person an Apikoras. But today's day and age, it's not so simple. If you have a secular Jew that doesn't know anything, just doesn't know, he never went to yeshiva. I think someone told me that he spoke to one of the great poskim of this generation, and he said someone who is a tinok shenishba, someone who is technically a child who was means a child who was captured. A child who was captured is not chayev in any mitzvahs. He's not considered a machal Shabbos. Even if you break Shabbos, he's not considered. Doesn't have the laws of one who breaks Shabbos, namely that he can't touch the wine and things like that, because he doesn't really know. He was captured amongst the goyim. He never knew. He never learned. So, and any laws that apply, like in this situation, someone who never saw. So he said someone who never saw the inside of yeshiva is considered a tinok shenishba, someone who is lost. So that applies to pretty much every secular American Jew. Pretty much, 99.999 of them. Unfortunately, sadly, never went to yeshiva, and they could be considered tinok shenishba, and therefore, because of that, there's if we consider them tinok shenishba, we're lenient about certain things. You're not, like, for instance, I'm inviting a non-from Jew on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov for a goy. You're also not allowed to cook for a non-from Jew on Yom Tov. However, if he's a tinok shenishba, there's room to be lenient because he's not in the same category. So since we're lenient over there, That's just one example where we can be lenient. Since we're lenient over there, we also have to be, and we consider him a tinok shenishba, someone who is lost, and therefore doesn't have the same category of a heretic. Therefore, we have to be strict. And when it comes to this law of speaking Lashon Hara about a person who is a tinok shenishba, someone who's a heretic, an Apikoras, so we have to be strict according to many poskim, especially American poskim, that we have to consider them tinok shenishba, and we cannot speak Lashon Hara about them because they don't fall into the category of a real Apikoras. It was told to me by Rabbi Kuritsky that Rav Chaim Kanievsky said that even a person who is tinok shenishba, he's still, it's sad he's a tinok shenishba, but the facts are that he still is considered an Apikoras. He's not, as they say, he's an Apikoras, but he's an Apikoras, Nebuch an Apikoras. It doesn't mean it's sad he's an Apikoras, but the facts are he's an Apikoras, and therefore, according to Rav Chaim, he would not be considered part of the Jewish nation. One would be allowed to speak Lashon Hara about him, but many poskim, especially American poskim, argue with that, and they hold that a person who never learned in yeshiva, or is a secular Jew who never really learned Torah, doesn't understand what it's about, even if he denies Torah's Moshe, denies Torah Shabbat Peh, he does not fall into this category, and one would not be allowed to say Lashon Hara, and therefore might be, person like, person like George Soros might be considered a tinok shenishba. He's a Jewish person, but he most likely never went to yeshiva. Probably not a real Apikoras. Probably not. I mean, I don't know his exact history, but somebody like that who's in the news, a famous non-from Jew, who people might want to speak badly about, it might be usher to speak Lashon Hara about him, because he may not be considered real Apikoras. So therefore, however, if someone would theoretically be considered real Apikoras, one would be allowed to speak Lashon Hara about him. But a person, again, has to be careful in today's day and age about applying this halacha practically. Okay, we'll hold it here. Thank you for joining. Everybody be well, and have a great evening.